Welcome to the Mom Atoosa podcast. I'm your host, Atoosa Benji. Hey.
Hi.
I'm so excited that you're here. I'm like giddy every time I see you.
Me too.
My guest today is Taylor, who is just an incredible human being, as are all of my guests. So Taylor is a doula. She is an interior designer by trade. Mm-hmm. She's a mama, a pretty new mama to a beautiful baby boy, and is married to a wonderful and supportive husband. And I actually met Taylor because she was a student of mine for my doula training course during the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. It was during the pandemic. And I was teaching all virtual, which I love and don't love, as most of us, in this virtual world now. And I would just see her face up on the square, and she was always listening so intently and taking notes. And I was like, I wonder where this woman's going to go with this training. Because as you know, people take doula training and then their lives take so many directions. Some people are like, that was great, I'm never going to use it. Some people are like, great, I have a skill, I'll put it away somewhere. Mm-hmm. I'll doula my daughter, or I'll doula my best friend, or wherever it goes. Some people go on and they're like, I want to be a birth worker, I'm going to be a midwife, I'm going to be an obstetrician, I'm going to be an L&D nurse, and they go off and do that. And with Taylor, I was just like, I'm gonna watch this woman and see where this goes. And sure enough, you took it all the way. You are now a licensed postpartum doula and birth doula, and you chose Doula as your organization. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk to you today. I have you on because you knew that you wanted a home birth almost before you were pregnant, it feels like to me.
Yes.
And I want to know how that came about. I also want to know what happened with your head full of doula training and having gone to all these births and now in a home birth yourself. Where were you able to take off your doula hat, put it on the side, put on your birthing person hat, and you can never really take off your doula hat because it's there. You have the knowledge. And at one point when things got a little bit hairy, I want to know what was going through your head and how you had mitigated that for yourself when you made the decision to have a home birth. Mm-hmm. So let's start from the beginning. Yeah. Why home birth? Why were you so sure that having a baby in a hospital was not the way you wanted to go?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, having been a little girl who was in the hospital many times for miscellaneous reasons, I just never felt safe in the hospital setting. I was an emotional child, but I only had anxiety, like predominantly when I look back, like getting my blood taken, going to the hospital room random morning because my eye was swollen, or just like whatever it might have been. And that is like breached into my adulthood too. So even still to this day, when I have to go do blood work, I'm like, oh my gosh, like last time I went, there's this 5-year-old girl crying and the mom's like, you're okay. And I'm like, no, we're not okay. Like this is not fun. So for me, I never felt safe in hospital settings. I feel most safe when I'm at home in my bed or my shower. Those are areas where I can ground myself and regather and recoup and get back to moving on in life. And so I never really saw myself giving birth in a hospital setting. I felt like for me, birth is a normal physiological process and it's not a medical event. And I feel like as soon as you step foot into the hospital setting, it turns into that because, even during triage and the admission process, they take your blood. And I'm like, I don't want to do that, and what better way to get out of your frontal cortex or, into your frontal cortex and doing the things that you don't want to do throughout the laboring process. And as you witnessed, I had my eyes closed the entire time. Like, I think throughout my birth, you guys might have asked me 2 questions, do you want some honey water or do you feel that rectal pressure? That was all I really needed, was just an environment to help facilitate my safety and my confidence. And that's what I felt like I had in the home birth space, but also what I wanted for myself. And I just knew that I wasn't going to get that in a hospital setting.
And what was the birth culture that you grew up with? Did your mother, your grandmother, aunts, cousins, was anybody born at home? And
No.
What was there? Did they know about this tendency of yours? Or was that something that happened when you were pregnant and discussing birthplace?
For sure. No, that's actually a really good question. So grandma, great-grandma, mother all gave birth in hospital settings. That being said, my great-grandmother is one of 16.
Wow.
Oh, I'm sorry. My great-grandmother is one of 16. So my great-great-grandmother, I don't really know where her birthing places, happened. I don't know much about those stories. However, my last cognitive thought as I was going into active labor, I had my rice sock. I was in active labor, but I was still doing things for myself at that moment. I had my rice sock. I opened up my pantry to warm it up in my microwave, and it was 11:11. And I said to myself, okay, Papa, okay, ancestors, give me a good birth, because I wanted to channel in the energy of my ancestry, which I knew had birthing energy. So I said that, and then it kind of all went black, and I went into a whole other dimension. Yes,
Very
exactly.
inward dimension. So you called them in to support you as you went on this journey.
Mm-hmm.
And when you met Guffey, did he know this was part of your plan? And was it a surprise to him?
Not a surprise at all. He knew that at the time that we conceived that I was definitely going to be having a home birth, and he supported me throughout the journey. And, he didn't ask a lot of questions. He more so really just was like, people have been giving birth for centuries, and it doesn't really matter where you do it, and everything will be fine. So he was very confident in my decision in that too.
What a blessing to have a partner who resonated with those wishes, because that's not always the case.
I know.
And what about family?
Everyone was pretty on board. I do come from a pretty hippy-dippy family, and everyone was just like, yeah, go for it. Do whatever makes sense to you. But even if anyone tried to combat it, I already had my mind made up. So. And
did you have a phrase or a word or an out, or because so many people plan a home birth and then people start giving opinions. So why would you do that? It's dangerous. It's irresponsible. It's the 21st century. We have options. Why are we going backward?
Right.
And my question is, are we going backward, or are we just returning to what was done pretty well, which is for a whole other episode.
Right.
And that resistance, then people carry into their birth journey. So you're getting into active labor, and all of a sudden your mother's voice or your mother-in-law's voice or your cousin's voice pops up to what if? What if? And those little what ifs make a difference because part of our prefrontal cortex is still activated by that. So I think, again, you went into it 100 yards ahead of the game. And with that said, you went quite a few days past your due date, which, just as a reminder, folks, the due date is actually a due month. It's guesstimated on 40 weeks of gestation, calculated by your last menstrual period typically. And most people give birth somewhere between 5 weeks. 37 to 42 weeks is when people give birth. And what we know is that most primates, which is a primipara, someone who hasn't had any children yet, give birth between 41 and 42 weeks. And that was based on a Harvard study. So this notion that it's 40 weeks, get this baby out, bad things are going to happen. And the pressure that people feel from the outside to induce or change their birth plan, or switch to the hospital, or not trust the midwife, or what is happening here? Did you have any of that?
Definitely. My son was born at 41 plus 3 days, and I always felt very confident in my body, my ability. I felt confident in my son and letting him pick his birthday for sure. That being said, the extracurricular conversations on the side from family members, from your best friends, all out of love, can get very tiresome of repeating the same conversation of, how is the baby doing? We're good. How are you doing? I'm fine. When do you think he's going to be here? Do you think he's going to come on this date? Because this date's my mom's cousin's best friend's birthday, and I really love her. So, it would be really cool if he was born on this day. And I'm just like, can everyone please stop?
I'll send him a text.
Yes, exactly. So what I had to do in my last 3 days of my pregnancy, which were the hardest emotionally, because of those reasons, I had to send best friends, family members a text saying, I'm going in the dark. If you need to reach out to me, don't. Contact Guffey, my husband, and he can be your soundboard. And if you really, really need me, he will let me know. And so that was my way of just kind of protecting myself and still creating that space to be able to kind of shut the door, And at the end of the day, mammals give birth by themselves. We have to create this very intimate setting. And when there's a lot of noise happening in the background, it doesn't really help facilitate that. So that was challenging for me for sure.
And I wonder if that actually helped you go into labor.
Yes.
That making your own little nest space by going dark on social media and on your phone, it may have actually done that. And there was also a difficult conversation with your midwife, because midwifery scope of practice is 41 weeks and 6 days. We actually need you to be in labor. Otherwise, we have to risk out and now work with our collaborating physician who will discuss induction with you. And that's very different than what you have planned. So I'm assuming that at some point in your head was this looming, midnight at this such and such a day, my midwife is going to come to the hospital with me and is no longer going, it's definitely going to be moving into plan B now.
Totally.
And how did that work in all of this dialogue that was going on?
I feel like there's just such a disservice to an extent of the way that the systems are set up. In obstetrical care, you really do combat this induction nature. And then, in midwifery services at the 42 weeks, you just time out. And, kind of going back to the conversation of this estimated delivery date, I mean, who's to say that at 42 weeks, maybe you're really only closer to like 41 and a half, and you could still potentially have a couple more days and still be in a timeline that could potentially be safe and, okay for everyone. Having those conversations weren't great, right? For me, like I envisioned my birth plan so much. I envisioned my birth so much. I manifested the shit out of it, right? Like, and the power of manifestation was real because I definitely saw a lot of parallels of the way that I thought things were going to go and the way that they did. That being said, it just is what it is, right? Like our culture just isn't set up to help us in those moments. And, the law is the law and we can't really combat that at this moment in time. I think some things need to change. But in those moments, you still have to kind of ground yourself and really think like, okay, at the end of the day, there's another human involved that we only have so much control over, and that this really is their journey. It's not my journey. I'm only there to help facilitate and give gentle nudges, which we did, right?
What were some of the things you did?
Well, we did a few membrane sweeps, right? Like the very last couple of days, we did some membrane sweeps, which I'm an advocate for. It's like there's a time and place for everything. And when it's the right time, then it's the right time to make those kind of decisions. Timing is everything in the laboring birth process.
Let me take a second to explain a membrane sweep to our listeners because they may not know that that's an option. So your midwife or your obstetrician places a sterile glove on, enters through the vagina, and if they are able to reach the cervix and the cervix lets them in because the cervix has gotten thinner and a little bit more dilated or open, 2 fingers go in and a massage is done almost like in a U shape and all the way around the cervix. And it stimulates the cervix, and when the cervix gets stimulated, often there is a body response that says, why is my cervix being pushed on? Is that a baby's head that needs to come out? Let me make that happen. So the body begins to have a release of hormones, which is in my childbirth class, which you will, if you're interested, you can take a listen to or take a look at. But the body has this positive feedback system where there's pressure on the cervix and then all the other instruments in the orchestra come to play. And they say, oh, okay, what's going on here? Let's get a little oxytocin on board. Do we need a little prolactin on board, a little adrenaline on board? Let's get this party going. And what you're doing is stimulating the bottom, essentially the most bottom part of the uterus, which is the cervix, which is the mouth of the uterus. But also you're separating the amniotic sac from the wall of the uterus. So all of that stimulation can very often get the body just in that place where it goes over the edge. Now, good news is if your body's not ready, it's not going to go there. You can do 4 membrane sweeps in a day. It's going to be like, that's great, but I'm not ready to go into labor. But it can certainly help push things that way. So that's what a membrane sweep is. How did that feel in your body?
I think it was fine, right? Like, I mean, anytime anyone's doing a cervical exam, first of all, is not necessarily, I think, like the most comfortable sensation, right? I mean, kind of is what it is sometimes if you consent to it. But I was ready for that in that moment in time because of this timeline, right? Like if there was no such thing as a timeline, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I really felt like what was best for me and my son was giving birth at home. So I was ready to kind of edge things along a little bit. And, we were trying other things too, right? Like I did the famous induction salad, which I still think is hilarious, but I did it because why not? I was doing curb walking. I was having sex. I was orgasming. I was doing the things that I felt like could help my body continue to open up.
Acupuncture.
I did acupuncture. I did chiropractic care the day that I was in early labor, which I think was pretty paramount with Dr. Berlin. Yeah. So that was an amazing experience. It felt good being on his table, and I left walking out that door with stronger contractions, so it definitely, I think it definitely helped. But like the membrane sweeps, not the most comfortable sensation, but I also trusted you. And I think that was what was most important about it. I wouldn't have consented to it if I didn't trust you.
There's something really cool, not only for the midwife, but also for the client. First of all, having a cervical check by the same person every time. So it's not like the nurse did it, then the doctor did it, then the resident did it, then the nurse did it, then the doctor did it. First of all, we all have different size fingers. So hopefully we're between 1 and 2 centimeters apart from each other. Once in a while I've had like, well, she's 3. Well, I got 6. How did you get 3? And then that really messes with the client's head.
Totally.
So there was just something really beautiful in seeing and feeling your body change. Because every time I checked your cervix, it was like, oh, it's softer. Oh, it's more aligned. Oh, it's thinner. Oh, it's a little more dilated. Like your body is changing and your body is going in the right direction. Your body knows what to do. We also had this looming phrase of big baby roaming around. Tell me how it made you feel to be told over and over again, you have a really big boy who's measuring really big and we would possibly recommend getting him out. Things that people are told all the time when their babies are measuring a little big. And then often they're not that big, but that's a whole other story.
For sure.
What did that do to your head?
I think it was heavy baby in all capital letters written on my report. Remember that?
Lovely. Heavy baby.
That to me didn't really bother me. I think it can bother some people, but I was a quote unquote heavy baby. I was 8 pounds, 14 ounces. And my mom is a much more petite woman than myself. And so for me, I just always knew that my body and my baby was going to be perfect size for my body. And then I was going to be given something that was, my body's capable, right? I was going to be given something that my body's very capable of. So Onyx, my son, was 8 pounds, 7 ounces. And I thought he was absolutely perfect.
He is absolutely perfect.
Yes.
Perfectly perfect.
Yep.
Tell me about his birth.
So the one thing about my birth was that it was very empowering, right? And like that to me is always what a successful birth story has been, but mine was so empowering that even 3 days after I saw you and I was like, I don't want this to be over and I want to do it all over again. And I think you were like Guffy and you were just like, okay, well just enjoy where you're at right now. And I totally got it. But I was just like this, my birth was everything and more than I wanted it to be. I felt very blessed that I felt like I did manifest the shit out of my labor. And I'll keep saying that time and time again. But, Guffy and I, we did a lot of walking throughout my pregnancy and the last few weeks and days, again, being kind of the most emotionally draining. We started fist pumping in the air, 4-hour labor, as we would go on these walks. And I had 4 hours of active labor, and it was amazing. No one can tell you what it's like to push your baby down and out your pelvis until having gone through that experience. So for me, having, this information in this toolbox of being a doula going into my own birth experience was amazing. That being said, it didn't really matter because this was all new to me. I never knew what it was like to have the sensations of a contraction, right? I don't know what my threshold of those sensations were going to be like. I couldn't conceptualize what it was going to be. Every birth is so different. And so I had to surrender to the process and just knowing that this was going to pan out the way that it should. And I fully believed and surrendered to that, which I think was the number one thing being a doula and then going through this process myself was that surrendering was what's best for me. And Guffy kept being you have too much information. This is going to be detrimental because you're going to be so in your head. And I'm like, you don't know that. I was I thrive off of information. I thrive off learning. I feel like me being prepared is knowing kind of the ins and outs of labor. And I had that toolbox. That being said, it didn't really matter because I was in an environment where I was able to close my eyes and just allow the sensations to happen and to embrace each and every one of them. And anyway, my birth experience was amazing, but also that too, things did happen that were out of my control, right?
Yes. Yep. As they can and do.
100%.
As they can and do.
100%. It really is the baby's journey. And that is something that you always have to just like kind of lean into, right? Onyx did have sticky shoulders. Right. So I birthed his head.
Did indeed.
I don't even know how long his head was born before his body continued to move out and kind of get past the sticky shoulders. And in that moment, I was like, okay, should I get into a lunge position? Do I need to get into a lunge position? Is Atoosa going to ask me to get into a lunge position? Like, are we about there? And I felt like we were almost there.
We were almost there. And we had practiced, right?
Yes.
Which is something that I learned at a birth practice that I was at, which was go over the birth emergencies, have a role play of birth emergency with the client, because there's nothing more devastating and scary and jarring and quite frankly affects labor negatively than a birthing person who has their eyes closed and they're rolling and they're pushing and they're breathing and the head comes out and then your midwife's like, get out of the water. We need to do something different. Do this, do that, and starts barking orders at you. And that can actually be detrimental to birthing the baby properly because
Totally.
the mom then goes into flight or fight and then you're already behind the 8 ball, right? So we practiced, all right. And I remember early on in one of our prenatal visits, you asked me about shoulder dystocia. And whenever a parent or birthing person asks me about a certain something, I make a note of it because you got a little intuition from somewhere. And for those listening, we've used the word empowerment, intuition, manifestation. If you're eye rolling, I understand. Because typically, obstetrics doesn't go with those words. It goes with healthy mom, healthy baby, just get out a good baby, we're good. And then as Dr. Neil Shaw says, we drop the mic. And why are we dropping the mic? There's so much more to this journey than get the baby out of the uterus, out of the vagina safely, and make sure the mom stays alive. And we good. We suture and we go home, which you didn't actually need any sutures at all, which that was great.
Yeah.
8 pounds, 7 ounce first baby
Yep.
with sticky shoulders and absolutely not even a skid mark laceration.
Yep.
And I think part of that is genetic and nutrition and practice and trust, all of those things. And the way that you were pushing was also very organic. But there was that point where the head came out and then he kind of wasn't budging. And I was feeling him, I was touching him, and I was waiting for him to rotate. And we waited a full minute on the clock. And then it was like, all right, babe, what are we doing here? But he wasn't stuck. I could still feel his shoulder starting to come. It was just slow. It was really slow. And you were kneeling in the birth tub, completely in your own world, pushing in a way that I have rarely seen someone push, which was the antithesis of not only what we learn, but what we teach about pushing,
Totally.
which is take a deep breath and bear down and push to 10 and then hold and do it again and do it again. And it was completely the opposite. There was humming, there was moaning, there was breath holding, and then there was not breath holding. There was complete breath release during the pushing. And I was like, this woman's like the poster child of organic pushing. Like, where did she even learn this? And I think I asked you later, like, where did you learn to push like that? And you said...
Honestly, that was like breath work is so important. And at the end of the day, I always feel like breath work is like everything through the laboring experience. But for me, the pushing, every contraction was different, right? And so I responded to the way that every contraction was. And so if it was more intense, I might have gotten a little bit more intense with my breath work. Mind you, I never pushed once. It was all breath work and filling my abs and my muscles and doing that deep breath of pushing everything out while also exhaling, right? And connecting to that. But then contractions that were a little bit more mellow, maybe I would just go and just kind of relax my jawline and just kind of breathe through it. Or maybe I was just quiet and just breathe through it and didn't do anything if I didn't feel like I needed to.
And the room was silent.
Yeah.
The room was completely silent. What made you so many people? There's so many misnomers or misconceptions I hear about doulas. One is I had someone call me yesterday. They were like, "Well, I'm getting an epidural, so I don't need a doula." in your situation, it's like, why did you get a doula? You had a midwife. You had a best friend there who was your photographer. Mm-hmm. You had a very supportive mother, supportive husband. Why on earth did you hire a doula?
I hired a doula because I knew the importance of a doula and everyone's role. And even though you are an incredible doula, I hired you as my midwife, not my doula. And so I didn't want those lines to be bled, but also I still wanted this womanhood, sacred environment, which I think I got because I did end up hiring someone that you were close with. And I wanted that sisterhood aspect of things, and hiring a doula was a little stressful for me because I know so many. And I was like, who am I going to pick to be my doula? And then I felt like I was kind of dissecting like all these people that I know and like kind of like being like, well, maybe if I have this person in the birth space, it'll be kind of like this or whatever. And then I was just like, you know what? I just need to start fresh. And so I asked you for a couple, references, and I ended up hiring Jessie, who is incredible, and she was amazing. I think she helped in the kind of the beginning stages before you came, and just kind of helping my husband, which I thought was also important, of just having that other team player there to, help me get in and out of the shower, to help me get me up on the toilet and off the toilet, and just kind of thinking about the things that maybe he wasn't thinking and that he didn't need to be thinking about because she was there doing it, right? And so that's why I hired a doula, was just to kind of help facilitate the things that might have been necessary for me or even my husband too. Someone just kind of looking out for kind of everyone in the space and just kind of help gently keeping things on track. And I think she did that. So
was there ever a time that you thought in your head while your doula hat was still on, how come she's not doing this? Or I need her to do that, or I learned this? Or were you completely open to her doula style?
There was one time where she had said, I know it's painful, but you got this. And I was like, wait, don't say that word, because I completely got rid of the word pain out of my vocabulary. I haven't used it in my doula practice. I use the terminology of contraction sensation. And so that was like the one thing where I was like, it's not painful, and I truly believed that. So that was like the only thing that like in my mind where I was just like, wait, I was like, I probably should have said that in my prenatal, visit with her, being like, I don't use that word, which is just kind of funny, but it didn't like get me off track or anything, but it was just like the one thing, but I was still, I didn't like, again, like my eyes were closed the entire time. So I didn't really know who was doing what. I just trusted every hand that was on my shoulder, every hand that tucked the hair behind my ear, that everyone was doing what they felt like was best for me. And I felt the love in every touch that I had. So it was beautiful. It felt great having everyone there doing their own thing and their own little part, and also being really kind of hands off too in the same aspect of little things. But, the little touches, they do make an imprint, and they were helpful.
What did it feel like having a head out of your body with no baby? What might have felt like for a long time? In
that moment, I definitely wasn't scared. I wasn't scared even throughout the whole birthing process, and even when I hemorrhaged, and we can touch upon that in a second too. But, I was never scared. I was listening to my body in that moment, and I did think his body was going to expel a little bit earlier than when it did, for sure. But I trusted. I was like, babies' heads are born first. Like, this is normal. We're waiting for my next surge to come on to, get everything and get the rest out. So I wasn't worried. But then once he kind of hung out a little bit longer than I anticipated, I was like, okay, now is a lunge the next thing I'm going to do. I was kind of anticipating that next thing, and we didn't need to do it, so it was fine. But yeah, I was never scared. I felt safe. I was very, very confident.
And how interesting when you think about the human brain or the human psyche, all of it, is while your eyes were closed and you were completely in labor land, you were still able to go in and out of accessing information from your brain, because you had that anticipatory guidance of, should this happen, this is what we're going to do. So it's almost like we talk about labor land as if people go there and they never come out. We go into labor land, but we're still very easily able to come out of it, which is why it's so important to keep the birth space safe and quiet and not engage. Because even with questions like, does that feel good? the person has to come out of labor land, access the file of, wait, does that feel good? What are they talking about? Their hand, the ice, I don't know. Does it? Doesn't it? What am I going to say? I like it. I don't like it. It's so great to use minimal words. But in this case, it wasn't even the words. It was you had the sensation of this head has come out. I feel my baby out partly in the world. And where is my next contraction? And what is my midwife thinking? And what are we going to do next? So it's incredible that you can go into this space, which I call labor land a whole other realm. But it's one hair away from this world or whatever realm we perceive this world to be. So that's really fascinating to me. And I'm grateful to the midwives who taught me to do those emergency drills, so to say, during the prenatal visits, including hemorrhage, which we talked about. Because in the midwifery setting, we do carry several different anti-hemorrhagics. The definition of a hemorrhage is more than 500 milliliters of blood loss after delivery of the baby. And that can happen before the placenta or after the placenta. But for whatever reason, whether the bleeding is from a laceration or the bleeding is from the uterus not contracting the way it should during involution, during that third stage, 500 milliliters is about 2 cups. So once you start seeing that on the Checks pad, it's like, okay, what's going on now? Tell me about that.
Yeah. That was like the one thing that I really felt like I had no control over kind of throughout the process of having to do with my body and not necessarily Onyx, right? Because it was not a good feeling. I felt the blood come out of my body. I felt the gush. I felt the draining sensation of liquid emptying out. And that was like oh man. And also, I mean, my mom was standing in the doorway and I'm laying on the couch, right? Baby born, Onyx on my chest, amazing, wonderful. Okay, placenta, feeling it like it's coming. Okay, let's get out of the tub, laying down on the couch. My mom's standing in the doorway. Placenta born, starting to kind of hemorrhage, blood gushing out. And my mom's face just turns white, stern, turns around and walks away. And I was like, oh, fuck. You know? So that wasn't really great. That being said, I still felt safe in my environment and my team. So, I mean, yeah, did it cross my mind? Okay, now I have this beautiful, healthy, delicious child on my lap that I love so much. And like, am I going to have to go to the hospital now for some reason? I mean, okay, like again, having to just surrender to the process. There's some things that are out of our control. And again, like, you know, what makes a successful birth story is not having things go as planned, right? It's still being empowered in those moments. And I still felt empowered and I still felt safe. So I was able to still say with the things that kind of got thrown my way, like everything happened the way that it did and it should have. And I still find every aspect of it beautiful.
And the hemorrhage was managed.
Yes.
And Onyx was a little shocked when he was born.
Yes.
And I remember looking at him and I was like, you know, he's okay, but he's still trying to figure it out a little bit. His heart rate was great. His breathing was a little bit, it wasn't quite flowing. And we ended up giving him one puff. One puff. I had a very experienced midwife with me. Hi, Sonia, who gave him one puff and he just pinked right up and he was super happy. But technically, you had possibly the top 3 scariest things that could happen at a home birth. It was preempted by going quote unquote overdue with a big, heavy baby boy.
Yeah.
And then a pretty fast labor with sticky shoulders. So to be clear, listeners, a shoulder dystocia is where the baby's head comes out, but then the shoulders get stuck behind the pubic bone, essentially. And sometimes it happens with really big babies, and sometimes it happens with really small babies. Typically, the literature talks about these big babies. People are really afraid of these 9-pound, 10-pound babies, particularly ones where the mom has gestational diabetes, which in your case wasn't the case. You all genetically have big babies, is what happens on your mother's line, it sounds like. And your pelvis was big enough for him, but he just needed a second to figure it out. So it wasn't a full shoulder dystocia where we would have put you into different positions and gotten the baby out. It was more of, okay, this little sticky, we got to just sort of edge him out a little bit. And sometimes after shoulder dystocia, when babies come out, we are expecting 1, a hemorrhage, and 2, a baby that's not very happy at us because the baby was kind of stuck for a little bit. And so many times with shoulder dystocia, you have a full resuscitation and the tray was ready, we were ready to go. And he didn't need that, but he needed just a little bit of air with, to help his lungs. Why the hemorrhage? Well, short labor, first baby, big baby, dystocia, increased the risk for hemorrhage. And so we were prepared for that too. So the IVs are ready to go. The intramuscular injections are ready to go. We have sublingual medication. We have vaginal medication. We have rectal medication. We have so many things to help control a hemorrhage. And really, if a hemorrhage is not controlled with those medications, it is time to go and move quickly, because people can lose a tremendous amount of blood. Like you talk about that blood leaving your body feeling. It's only so long before the heart and the brain are like, wait, where's the blood supply? And then bad things can happen. So part of being a midwife, being an obstetrician, being an L&D nurse, anyone in the birth world, is you got to watch. And there are so many things that people talk about, you're a midwife, that's so scary. That's so scary. When you're watching and you're prepared, you're able to take action. Typically, the bad things come when you ignored an intuition that you had, or you didn't prepare adequately for what was going to come. And sometimes bad things happen when it came out of the clear blue sky, and that's also just journey, right? So you kind of had these 3 very scary events, and yet you thrived, and you have this big smile on your face when you talk about your birth journey. And I wonder, what is it that separates someone who will sit in front of me and say, I had a shoulder dystocia, the baby was blue, and then I bled, and it was horrific, and I don't think I'll ever do that again. What do you think separates us? How does that, what causes that to happen?
It's a really good question.
And especially in light of your doula practice, what are you seeing?
I think it's all about the way that we perceive things. And in the moments too, I'll just go back to feeling safe. These things happened that I wasn't in control over, but that's kind of what labor and delivery is all about. You don't really have control over a lot of aspects. The body's going to do what it's supposed to do during that process. And it really is up to the baby. So I think as long as you kind of go into that, always knowing that surrendering is everything, you just allow things to happen and you move on. And that's kind of what I did, and I didn't feel unsafe or scared. It happened. Everyone's okay. Everyone's okay. Everyone's okay. We move on. It's okay. It's fine. If it were to happen again, I'm sure it'll be just fine. You have to surrender to the process. And that's kind of what I did. And I didn't dwell over anything. What was meant to happen happened. And at the end of the day, everyone was okay.
I feel like as a culture, we don't do well with surrender. There's definitely an element of control and an illusion that the more we control, the safer it'll be. It's an illusion of control that is put forward by our, bless them, medical establishment. That's a whole different podcast, where we talk about where doctors and midwives are really squeezed in this system to have certain outcomes, many of which are out of our control, even if we intervene. But somehow we're made to think that the intervention is going to give us a certain outcome, which is completely not true.
Right. I also think from a birthing person's perspective, for me, right, thinking about hopping ship and doing an induction or being in the hospital setting or whatever, I think for someone like me, if I were to have been put in that setting, I would have tried to have more control over every aspect of my labor and delivery versus being at home and surrendering to the process. Because as my perception of a hospital birth, there are a lot of interruptions. There are a lot of things that could potentially be thrown at you for miscellaneous reasons and whatnot. And each time you get presented with those situations, you have to take control over those situations, whether you abide into it or not.
Correct.
So it's a completely different dichotomy if you think about it, right?
Absolutely. It's a great way of putting it. Absolutely. I want to share a funny story about your labor, which I know we've talked about a couple times, but you came into the office for an NST, basically the evening before your labor got really active. And an NST stands for a non-stress test, which is a point of care assessment of how the baby is doing at that moment. How often are the contractions coming? How long are they lasting? And what is the baby's heart rate doing in relation to the contractions? And a baby who is doing well at that time typically is tolerating the labor by having a steady heartbeat, having some accelerations, not having any decelerations, and having good variability, which means the heart rate of a baby, which is typically between 110 and 160, baby is somewhere in between and giving us like 128, 132, 135, 136, 119, 122. This beautiful like variable of 5 beats typically is how we know a baby is doing pretty well, 5-6 beats. And so you came in for that, but you had just gone to the chiropractor.
Yeah.
And driven across town to come to our office to have your NST. And I remember whenever I teach childbirth classes, I love teaching childbirth classes, but when I taught childbirth classes, there is a point in labor where labor becomes active. And I always tell people, the partners, the family, whoever's going to be there, the doulas, when I'm training doulas, look for the change. There is a point where the client is doing the contractions, going through the waves, going through the contraction pattern, and they're still chatty and talking, or, oh, that was a big one, or that was a small one, or I felt that one in my back, or, oh, I feel like I need to poop, or give me something to drink, or I could go for a burger, or whatever they're doing in that early labor phase, which the body is still working, but it's pretty manageable. And then there's that time where you slip into active labor, and an unmedicated person will typically go very inward. And I call that beginning to change. So you came into the office and you went to the bathroom to change. I'm not sure why you went to change. Were you wet? Had your water broken?
Well, because remember my water had potentially broken
yes.
the night before. And I went to the chiropractor and I was wearing like these like exercise short situations that I typically would wear pre-pregnancy, but I was like, they're kind of big, like whatever. So I put them on thinking that this was kind of like a great thing to wear to the chiropractor. And by the time we got to the office, right, I was like, I need to get these things off of me now. They're so tight. And like, it was definitely kind of starting to feel some different sensations. So Amy was like, well, I have an adult diaper. And I was like, that's perfect. Give it to me. Like, I need something loose and comfortable. So
yeah, Amy Tinney is the midwife I was partnering with for the NST. And so you went into the bathroom to change. And the tailor that had walked in was not the tailor that I had seen that morning, because I think I had come to check in on you in the morning, because when water is broken, we keep a closer eye on the baby and the mother. And I looked at you and I was like, oh, Taylor's not having it. Like something has shifted. So you go into the bathroom and I turned to Guffey and I said, she's definitely changing. And he looks at me and he goes, I know, she's in the bathroom changing. I was like, no. She's changing. And it took him a minute because we had talked about it at the prenatal visit. And he was like, oh my God, she's changing. Like that kind of changing, you know? And by the time you came out of the bathroom, like you were starting to get quite uncomfortable. And by the end of the NST, you were even more uncomfortable. And then you were in active labor a few hours later and had your baby a couple hours after I got there.
Yep.
Tell me about the decision not to get checked, because I did offer.
Yep. Yeah, totally. So, you know, with the rupture, anytime anything goes into the vagina, you're more susceptible to receiving an infection. And I already knew that things were a little bit different. I had prodromal labor, right? Like for weeks leading up to me actually going into active labor. So I was very used to kind of what those sensations would kind of start to feel like. That being said, with the rupture, right, I was like, well, this should be it, right? Like,
yeah, rupture of membrane meaning your water had broken.
My water had broken,
Whether it's a leak or it's a gush, your water had broken and we had confirmed it. So you were now 24 hours past that, which is when we're sort of like, okay, are we going to go into active labor? Or again, are we going to talk about transfer to collaborating physician? So you had that looming also. I forgot to even mention that along with your heavy baby and going post-dates, right? You're now more than 24 hours, a little bit more than 24 hours past rupture time. Yeah. Right? And just for the listener, prodromal labor is a labor pattern where you're sort of in and out of labor, but nothing is like beginning to get longer, harder, stronger. It's just coming and going and kind of exhausting you mentally and physically, but you're not getting into active labor the way one would expect after 8 or 12 or 15 hours.
Yes. Yep. At night, prodromal labor at night. And then the sun would come up at 5 a.m. and everything would mellow out. And so, yeah, for me, I was just like, why get checked when at the end of the day, the numbers don't mean anything? You know, if you were to check me and say, wow, great, you're 3 centimeters dilated and you're 90% effaced, like, this is great. It didn't matter. Those numbers still didn't mean anything. I could have still labored for another 20 hours, or I could have labored 2 more. Like, to me, the numbers didn't mean anything. And also risk of infection. Like, that's the kind of last thing I wanted to do with having a home birth. Any sort of risk of putting anything else onto the table to potentially lead to a transfer was the last thing I wanted to do. So hands off.
And every time you check the cervix, even if you do it with a sterile glove, the vagina is not sterile. Vaginas have germs that do not belong in the uterus. So you are increasing the risk of infection, even if your client has tested GBS negative, by 3 to 4-fold. So when did you finally accept to be checked?
It's so funny.
What made you decide that?
No, it's so funny because this is actually like, I mean, of course we know that the brain does a really good job of keeping the birth space sacred at mind, and just it blocks out some things and others. And I think you arrived close to 2 a.m.-ish, something like. My son was born at 4:04 in the morning, but when Atoosa arrived, she asked to check me, and I remember saying no. I remember saying no to the first check. And then you asked again. I don't remember this though.
Hours
my
later,
brain,
yeah.
And you had asked to check again, and I guess I consented, but my body just kind of blocked it out, which is kind of funny because I said no to the first one, so consenting to the next one, I think my body was just like, let's just kind of chalk this out of the memory and, kind of block it out. And I said yes just because, I think it was important to just kind of know kind of where we were at, when to call in backup Sonia and kind of see where we were in the process, which you tell me, because even this, I remember you telling me that I was 9.5 centimeters, right? But where was I? Was I more complete, or was I 9.5? Was I almost there? Because I don't even really remember.
Yeah. I think you just had a little lip.
A little
that
lip.
we were just working with, which is what 9.5 is.
Yeah. Which I was surprised. I was like, wow.
Yeah, it was on the bed. I remember it was on the bed, and I checked, and I was like, oh, well, hello.
Yeah.
I could feel almost all of his head, all the way around his head. And my assistant Sonia was just minutes up the road, which was interesting too, talking about manifestation, because you met her. So Taylor came to the office and then went to lunch with Guffey afterwards. And then me and a couple other midwives, including Sonia and Amy, went to lunch at the same place just because it was down the street. And I guess what you told me was you saw Sonia and you were like, she's going to be at my birth. Interestingly, Sonia told me too that I have a feeling I'm going to be at her birth. So there was already some sort of chemistry manifestation going on. And how interesting that you did have a 4-hour active labor and your baby was born at 4:04. So there's a lot of 4s going on there, which is fascinating. Tell me about your doula practice. Do people ask you how your birth was and then hire you, or maybe if don't hire you because of that?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Which is hard to know, right? Sometimes we just don't know.
Of course. And sometimes it gets brought up and during the interview process. Sometimes it doesn't. I definitely am not one to speak on it unless, someone, asks. That being said, I have been and still always am a firm believer that you don't necessarily have to go through the birthing process in order to be a good doula. I know so many amazing doulas that have not. And I felt like I was an amazing doula without.
Amen.
Yes, 100%. That being said, I now know what it's like to birth a baby down and out my pelvis, which I don't think anyone can explain that sensation to you of your hips physically widening and pushing that baby down and out. I know what it's like to have the contraction sensations. Everyone feels them differently. So, with that, I know what it's like to look at your partner after laboring, after you've given birth to your child in that special moment. There are things that I feel like I can just relate. I know what it's like to anticipate your baby and having those stressors of the extracurricular family members and whatnot. I know what that's like and how heavy some of these situations can be. But more so than anything, I know what it's like to be empowered. And literally, I went back to taking clients 8 weeks postpartum because I had the biggest fire under me that I had ever experienced before. And knowing that I need to get back out there as soon as possible to help other mothers feel empowered the way that I have felt.
Carry the message.
Yes. And so that to me has definitely, I feel like in my doula practice has made me a better doula, just a deeper understanding and holding space in a way that I don't think I really did before, having gone through it.
And what is your message to people considering an out-of-hospital birth?
So I usually tell my clients when they're considering that to do their part, right? You need to go tour the facilities, go tour the birth centers, sit at home in your living room. And when you walk through the halls of the hospital, you know, it's you need to see if you catch that feeling, or at the birth center, and see if, you know, when you travel to a new area that you haven't been before and you go, I could see myself living here. And you get that feeling, right? The little gut intuition of being like, I love it. Like, I can see it. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And if you catch that feeling, go for it. Like, this is your birth. That's where you want to be. If you don't, listen to that and see, where do you feel safe? What do you envision for yourself? Sit down, manifest it, envision it, and see where the cards kind of fall. Because at the end of the day, your birth, your choice, and you should know. You'll know.
I love it. I love it. Just lastly, did you ever talk to your mother about her seeing you hemorrhage? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes trauma comes from seeing someone else's reaction to what's happening with our body.
Totally.
Because you didn't see the blood. You felt the blood. Or sometimes I see dads turn white. I have a tendency that when I'm pondering something, I turn my head to the side. And one time I was looking at a monitor and my head was to the side, and my client got really worried. And she was like, are you right there? Like, what are you seeing? What's going on with my baby? And I was like, no, I'm looking. And I turned my head to the side. Mm-hmm. But people's reactions to what's happening to us in labor can actually cause trauma. What did your mom say about that experience?
Oh, it's funny you asked that, because that moment reminded me of being a little girl. I had a tumor in my left ear and I was on the operating table. And when that was happening, my mom was the one that passed out in the room.
Oh my goodness.
And so all the medical staff turned to her and was like, oh my goodness, like, put your knees in between your legs. And oh my gosh, we have to help her. And here I am strapped down to this table, this young little girl being like, oh my God, my mom. And then like, here I am. And I like don't have any control over this situation, wow. Which again, kind of was one of those life experiences that have led me not to love hospital settings. But in that moment, it reminded me exactly of that time. Where it was like, oh my gosh. And it was not great. You know, it wasn't great, because my mom being a source of comfort for me in my entire life, seeing her turn pale as a ghost and kind of, you know, and internalize that situation, I literally said to my mind, oh, fuck. You know?
Right.
So it wasn't great, but at the same time, you were talking to me through that moment. And I just kind of tapped more into you and just being like, okay. And you even asked for my consent. You're like, this is what we should do. Okay. And I was like, okay. And this is what we did. And everything kind of mellowed out there really quickly afterwards. So it was fine, but it definitely was kind of like oh, here we go.
And what did your mom say about it?
Well, I told her about it. You know, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, like, you definitely didn't help that in that moment in time.
That wasn't your usual color.
No, you know, and we laugh about it because it was kind of like a minute and like really short snippet of just kind of the process. You know, we recovered well, everyone recovered well and everything. But yeah, I think next time, maybe she's just not right there on that side of things.
You would do things differently in that
Probably.
way.
Yeah.
And when you talk about this concept of empowerment, how did empowerment bring you to the postpartum period? Mm-hmm. How did it help you through that?
Yeah, for sure. So my postpartum period felt just right for me.
Glorious is the word I would like to use as someone looking in. Just saying.
Yeah, it just felt right. You know, sometimes people are very overwhelmed with like these high emotions. Well, Guffy, my husband, he cried for 3 days nonstop after Onyx was born. I thought I was going to be like that, being a very emotional person, but I did not shed a tear. I felt very content in that moment of my life that this was how things should be. And just seeing that transition of myself. That being said, and kind of funny story, be really gentle to your loved ones, and especially their postpartum mamas, because it could be the littlest thing that can kind of set them off. I still had baby blues for about 24 hours where I could not regulate myself at like 7 days postpartum. And it was all because I was changing Onyx's. I did all the night stuff and let Guffy sleep. And in the middle of the night, I changed Onyx's diaper and I left a dirty diaper on the changing table. And then the next day, Guffy was like, oh, so are we just like leaving dirty diapers on the changing table.
Ouch.
And I lost it instantly, full on meltdown, sobbing, crying. And he was like, I am so sorry. I did not mean to set you off like that. Like, are you okay? He felt terrible. But I just looked at him and I was like, give me grace. I didn't mean to, like, please. And I couldn't regulate. I was completely dysregulated. I could not stop crying for like 24 hours. And he was just like, are you okay? And I knew I was okay. I knew it was the hormones. And of course, it's one of those things when people always say, it's the hormones, it's not you. I knew that, but when you're in it, you're in it. And it just feels so real.
Yeah. And the difference, baby blues can have that reaction and really should lift by 2 weeks. So to my listeners, if a postpartum person is exhibiting that behavior and it's been well past 2 weeks, it's time to begin to get some support and have proper screening and proper intervention, because that's when we start to slip into perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, which is in itself a whole huge topic.
Right.
But I like how you termed it baby blues, because that's sort of like PMSy or premenopausy or perimenopausy or menopausy or puberty, just where you're like, I know this is not me and I'm okay. Like, my foundation is okay, but what's going on the top is a lot. Whereas when it slips into more, it's like, I feel my foundation crumbling.
Yep.
And I feel like I hear you say that, where you knew you were okay. You were having these feelings almost like on top of your foundation, but you knew that you were strong on the bottom. And unfortunately, with OCD and anxiety and depression and even psychosis, the foundation is beginning to crumble, and intervention is paramount.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on. It's just, you're such a light and such a gift to people everywhere, and birthing people and new mothers. Thanks for listening to the Mama Atoosa podcast on the Industry Plant Podcast Network. Mama Atoosa is hosted by me, Atoosa Benji, and produced by Josh Stretton Carlson. Chris Agnew is our audio editor, and our theme music is composed by Mary Lalazarian. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving us a review and subscribing. See you next Tuesday.